She had not meant for him to find her. She had not meant for anyone to find her. The den smelled of ash and scorched pine by the time the flames retreated past the ridge, and Marin had pressed herself so flat against the earthen wall that the soil had stained her cheek the color of old bruising. 6 small bodies were arranged around her, not in a circle of protection, though that was how it looked, but in the only configuration that kept all of them breathing, that kept all 6 noses pressed against the one strip of clean air that threaded beneath the den's collapsed entrance. She had counted their breaths the entire time. She had not once counted her own. That was the constraint she had lived inside for 3 years. Other lives before hers, other lungs before her lungs. Other heartbeats that mattered more than the one stuttering and irregular in her own chest, the one that had been called wrong since the night she was born without a wolf. She was 24 years old, an omega with no shift, and she was holding 6 orphaned pups against a wall of burning forest with nothing but her body and her will between them and the smoke. She did not know the Alpha King was already on the ridge. She did not know he could smell her fear from 200 yards away, and that it had stopped him mid-stride like a blade between the ribs. She did not know that in the 300 years of his bloodline, no scent had ever done that to him before. Marin's earliest memory was of being told what she was not. She was not a wolf. She was not a full omega. Not in the traditional sense, because a true omega could at least shift slowly, awkwardly, but shift. She had stood in the moonlit clearing of Ashfield Pack territory every month from her 7th birthday to her 17th, and the moon had looked back at her with the same cold indifference. A stone wall shows to a hand pressed against it. Nothing moved inside her. No second shape stirred beneath her skin. There was only Marin, singular and still, while everyone around her rippled and changed. Her mother had cried the first year and been practical by the 3rd. Her father had stopped looking at her directly sometime around the 5th. The pack had a word for what she was, though they used it only when they thought she couldn't hear. Hollow. A hollow born. A person with the blood, but not the gift, the lineage, but not the transformation. The pack membership by name alone and by courtesy, that could be withdrawn at any administrative meeting if the Alpha decided the pack's resources were better spent elsewhere. The current Alpha of Ashfield, a man named Gareth, had decided that 4 years ago. He had not expelled her formally. Formal expulsion would have required documentation, a hearing, the presence of a pack council representative, and Gareth was not a man who invited oversight. He had simply stopped listing her name in the pack's census. He had stopped including her in the food allotment. He had told the pack that Marin had chosen to live separately at the edge of the territory near the old ridge dens, and that this was her preference and should be respected. No one had argued. A few had left food at the tree line in the first weeks, quietly after dark, the way people leave offerings for something they're uncertain about. Then that had stopped too. What had not stopped what Gareth had not thought to account for, because he did not consider her capable of sustained purpose, was Marin's habit of collecting things that had been discarded. The 6 pups had come to her one at a time over 18 months, each from a different story of loss. 2 were the children of a bonded pair killed in a border dispute. 1 had been left at the ridge den's entrance in a basket with a note that said only too many mouths. 2 more were littermates whose mother had died of fever in the first week after their birth, passed from hand to hand in the pack until the hands ran out. The last, the smallest, a girl Marin had named Wren for the sound she made when she was hungry, had simply been found alone in the snow on a morning in February with no explanation that anyone offered and no one who claimed her. Gareth knew about the pups. He knew, and he had not stopped it because it solved a problem for him, the problem of unmated omegas and unclaimed orphans, both occupying pack resources and because he was practical in the way that small men with power are. Practical. He let Marin be useful. He did not let her be acknowledged. She had built the den herself over 6 months, widening a natural cavity in the ridge's eastern face, reinforcing the entrance with stones she carried one at a time from the creek bed below. She had learned from books she borrowed and never returned from the pack's small library books on den construction, on early childhood development in wolf-born young, on the nutritional needs of pups who shifted before their teeth came in all the way. She had traded labor laundry, harvest work, mending for enough food to keep 7 mouths fed through 2 winters. She had made something real out of what she'd been given, which was next to nothing. This was Marin at 24, lean and practical-handed. With dark hair she kept braided to stay out of her work, and eyes the color of the creek in autumn, not quite brown, not quite amber, catching light differently depending on the angle. She was not beautiful in the way the pack's mated females were beautiful, which was to say she was not decorated or softened or displayed. She was the kind of woman who looked more herself when she was working, when her hands were doing something, when she was in motion. She had a voice she used sparingly, and opinions she kept to herself, not from timidity but from the long education of being someone whose opinions were not invited. She had also, in 3 years of living at the Ridge, become intimately familiar with fire season. The ridge ran along the eastern edge of Ashfield territory, which put it in the path of the dry winds that came off the higher mountains in late summer and sometimes in early autumn. Marin had twice managed small brush fires that crept toward the den, once with a cleared fire break she'd prepared in advance. Once, by collapsing an old dead tree, she'd pre-cut for exactly this kind of emergency. She was not careless. She was not unprepared. But the fire that came on the 4th night of the 8th month was not a brush fire. It was a mountain fire, which was different in scale, the way an ocean is different from a puddle, and it came in the night, and it came with the wind, and it came faster than the ridge's own warning systems. The birds going silent, the deer moving in the wrong direction could be trusted. She had smelled it at midnight. She had the pups in the den by 1/2 past, the entrance collapsed behind them down to a handspan gap at the bottom. All 6 children pressed against the back wall with their faces in her lap or her chest or tucked into the crook of her arm, and she had breathed slowly and deliberately and counted their breaths and told herself, "The den holds, the earthen wall holds, the gap stays clear. You have done the right things, now you wait." She had been waiting for 4 hours when the Alpha King crested the ridge. His name was Kale. He was called the Alpha King because that was what he was, the sovereign authority over all packs within the mountain range, a territory that encompassed 47 pack lands and several 100,000 souls, wolf-born and human-blooded and every combination between. He had held this authority for 11 years, having taken it from his father at the age of 26, in circumstances the official pack histories described as a succession, and the pack gossip described more accurately as a necessary intervention. His father had been a man of appetites. Kale was a man of controls. He was 6'4", built in the manner of someone who had trained for function rather than display broad through the shoulders, lean everywhere else, with hands that looked better suited to hauling rope than signing treaties, though he had signed a great many treaties. His hair was dark, kept short in a way that suggested he did not think about it much. His eyes were gray, the specific gray of overcast sky before rain, and they had the characteristic of appearing to evaluate everything they rested on. Not from coldness, but from a habit of assessment so deeply ingrained it had become expression. He did not smile easily. He did not touch people easily. He had a reputation for fairness that was genuine, and a reputation for warmth that was, by most accounts, fictional. People who had worked closely with him over years sometimes reported, in private, that they had occasionally glimpsed something else, something careful and almost tender that appeared in unguarded moments and disappeared quickly, the way a deer steps into a clearing and then steps back out. His head of security, a woman named Britta, who had served 3 coal kings and had opinions on all of them, had said once to her assistant, in confidence, "He loves things. He's just afraid of what it costs." This had not been repeated in his presence. He was on the ridge that night because of the fire, but not only because of the fire. He had been conducting a territory inspection of the eastern mountain packs for a week, a review of resource management, border compliance, census accuracy, and had been in Ashfield territory for 2 days prior to the fire's outbreak. When the fire had jumped the 3rd ridge and threatened to roll toward the eastern dens, he had sent his escort down to coordinate evacuation and come up himself to assess the line, which was the kind of thing he did and that his escort had stopped arguing with him about because it made no difference. He had been standing at the top of the eastern ridge, watching the fire's progression in the valley below, when the scent hit him. He had smelled fear before. Fear was a specific thing in the wolf-blooded world. It had a chemical signature, a particular high-frequency note beneath the more complicated music of a person's scent, and he had encountered it in many forms and many people over 11 years of governing. He was not moved by fear the way a lesser man might be moved, not excited by it, not contemptuous of it. He simply noted it, evaluated its source, and acted accordingly. This was different. The scent came from below the ridge, from the earthen face of the eastern slope, and it was layered in a way he could not immediately make sense of. There was fear. Yes, a clear, sharp, sustained fear that had been running for hours, he estimated, from the depth of it, but beneath the fear was something else. Something that should not have been in the same signal, something that in his considerable experience was never present alongside genuine animal terror. Steadiness, deliberate calm, the physiological signature of someone who was afraid and had decided, consciously and completely, that their fear was not the most important thing happening. He stood on the ridge for a full minute trying to locate this scent in his memory, in his catalog of known things. He could not. He shifted and went down the slope. He found the collapsed entrance by scent alone, barely visible in the smoke-dimmed night, a narrow gap at the base of the earthen wall, and through it came air breathable, clean-ish, and the scent of her, unmistakable, and beneath her scent, 6 smaller signatures, young ones, pupils still in early development, packed close together, alive. He shifted back. He crouched at the gap. He did not think about protocol. He did not think about what it meant that he was crouching in the dirt in the middle of a fire assessment talking to a gap in the ground. "There are people in here," he said. Not a question. Silence from inside. Then a voice low, controlled, with the particular flatness of someone who had been managing their breathing very deliberately for a long time. "There are. We're fine. The fire has passed the secondary ridge. You can come out." "Not yet." A pause. "The embers run for another hour in this wind. The ground outside is still radiating. Their paws will burn." Their paws. He registered this. Pups. The 6 small signatures. "How long have you been in there?" 4 hours, approximately." "Are you injured?" Another pause. Longer this time, not significantly. He could smell that this was not entirely true. He could smell blood, a surface wound, not deep, not dangerous, but there. He could also smell more faintly, the edge of heat exhaustion beginning to develop. 4 hours in a sealed earthen den during a mountain fire meant 4 hours of elevated temperature, reduced oxygen, sustained physiological stress. "Not significantly is not the same as no," he said. This time, the pause had a different quality. He had the impression she had not expected him to note the distinction. "I have a cut on my arm," she said, "from the entrance collapse. It's not serious. The pups are all right, all 6 of them. None of them are hurt." He heard it then, heard what the sentence was doing, heard the emphasis and the ordering of it. "None of them are hurt." Came before anything about herself, came as the thing that mattered, the account she was rendering first. He sat back on his heels in the ash and the wind and looked at the gap in the ground and felt something shift in his chest that he could not immediately name. "What is your name?" he asked. "Marin," she said. "Marin of Ashfield." He had no memory of that name from the census. He would realize this later. In the moment, he simply said, "I'm going to wait here. Come out when you're ready. I'll have people here with water and something for the pup's paws when you do." There was a silence. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. She came out as the first gray light edged the horizon. The pups coming first, she passed them through the gap, one at a time. The largest ones first, so they could stand and receive the smaller ones, and he was there, as he'd said, with 2 of his people who had warm water and the salve they used for burns during pack emergencies, and the pups blinked in the smoke-filtered dawn and pressed against Marin's legs when they emerged. And she stood in the mouth of the den, with ash on her face, and her braid half undone, and a bandage that she had apparently applied to her own arm at some point during the night, and she looked at him. He was still in the form she would later learn he almost always used in the field, large, quiet, gray-eyed, not performing anything. He was watching her the way he had watched the fire from the ridge, assessing, noting, categorizing. She had the disconcerting feeling that whatever category he was creating for her had not existed in his system before. Thank you, she said, because she had been raised with manners even when they'd been wasted on her, for waiting. Are they all healthy? He asked, meaning the pups. Yes. She looked at his people crouching with the water and the salve, and 3 of the pups were already allowing themselves to be attended to, which meant they were not in shock. Yes, they're good. They're good children. Something crossed his face. She could not read it. It was there, and then it wasn't. Whose are they? He asked. She held very still. Mine. You're their mother? I'm what they have. He looked at her for a long time. She did not look away, because she had made a policy of not looking away from things. Even when the things were alpha kings standing in the aftermath of a mountain fire with soot on their boots and gray eyes that seemed to be doing something to the air around her that she did not have a word for. Come to the camp, he said. All of you. For the day, at least, until we've assessed the den's stability and the pups have rested. She should have said no. She had a long history of saying no to things that felt too good to be safe. But the smallest pup, Wren, had wrapped both small fists in the hem of Marin's shirt and was leaning against her hip with the total bodily trust of an exhausted child. And the camp meant food and safety and real air, and she was so tired that the steadiness she had maintained for 4 hours was beginning, now that the immediate crisis was over, to cost her in ways she could feel. All right, she said. She followed him down the ridge. The days that followed moved in a shape that Marin did not understand until she was already inside it. The camp was a field installation tents, not permanent structures, but well-ordered and supplied in a way that spoke to long experience with emergency response. His people were efficient and relatively kind. The pups were given a large tent with bedding and food and were asleep within an hour of arrival. Marin was given water and a medical examination by a woman who said only that the arm cut was clean and would heal cleanly, and then she was given a cot and told to rest. She did not rest. She sat on the cot and listened to the sounds of the camp and cataloged everything around her for threats, which was a habit she had developed and could not easily suspend. After an hour, she gave up and went to sit outside the pup's tent in the early morning air, and that was where he found her. He came without announcement, without an escort, carrying 2 cups of something hot. He held one out. She took it. They sat outside the tent in the freshening morning, and she waited for the interview, the questions, the assessment. Whatever official process was going to be applied to her, now that she had been found by the Alpha King living in a collapsed den on the edge of a pack territory with 6 orphaned children and no pack listing. He said, "You knew the fire was coming. I smelled it at midnight. I had maybe 30 minutes. And you went into the den. It was the safest option. The materials were already in place. I'd prepared for this. You prepared for being trapped in an earthen den during a mountain fire. I prepared for fire seasons in general. The den has a smoke baffle, and the entrance gap is positioned for the prevailing wind. I made those choices deliberately when I built it." He was quiet for a moment. "You built the den. Over 6 months. Yes. Alone." She looked at him sideways. "Who else?" He turned his cup in his hands. She noticed the hands large, careful, calloused across the palm in a way that was consistent with weapons training but also with sustained manual work. He did not hold the cup like a man who had never washed his own dishes. "How long have you been outside the pack proper?" he asked. She felt the careful neutrality in the question and decided to match it. 4 years, approximately. "And before that?" "I was born in Ashfield. I've been in Ashfield my whole life." "Why are you not in the census?" She had known this was coming. She looked at the tent where the pups were sleeping, and she thought about what she had to protect and what she had to lose. And she said, "You should ask Alpha Gareth that." He absorbed this. She could see that he had heard what she had not said, which was the thing she most needed him to hear without her having to say it outright. That she had not chosen to be invisible, that the invisibility had been done to her, and that naming it too plainly put her in danger while she was still on Gareth's territory. "I'll be speaking with Alpha Gareth this afternoon," he said. "I know," she said. Another silence. This one was different from the others. She was beginning to catalog his silences the way she cataloged everything by type, by function, by what they were trying to accomplish. This one was not evaluative. This one was more like a room that had just had furniture moved in it and needed a moment to settle into its new configuration. Marin, he said, I want to ask you something directly. All right. You said the pups were yours, in the sense of being what they have. Yes. Are you what they have only because no one else would be? She had not expected that question. She had prepared for bureaucratic questions, territorial questions, questions about the legality of her situation and the origin of the pups and her right to claim guardianship without pack sanction. She had not prepared for someone asking her, precisely and carefully, whether she had chosen this or simply inherited it. She thought about it honestly. Both, she said. At first only the second, by now entirely the first. He nodded. This seemed to satisfy something he had been calculating. You have no wolf, he said. The old flinch, the one that lived in the bones and not the face, moved through her, and she managed it. No. And you believe that disqualifies you from pack standing. I don't believe it. It's the operational reality of every pack territory I'm aware of. Not every, he said. She looked at him. There are 3 packs under my governance that hold Hollowborn as full members. It's not common, but it's not impossible. The law does not require the shift. He paused. It is often assumed to require it. The assumption is not the law. She held very still. She felt something dangerous happening in her chest, something warm and unreliable, the sensation of a door opening onto a room she had not known to want because she had spent so long being certain it was locked. Why are you telling me this? She asked. He looked at her with those gray assessment eyes, and for the first time she saw the thing that Britta would have recognized, the careful, almost tender thing surface briefly and be managed. Because you should know it, he said. That's all. It was not all. She knew it was not all, but she was not yet in a position to say so, and neither, it seemed, was he. The afternoon came, and he went to meet with Gareth, and Marin stayed in the camp with the pups and a knot in her stomach that she identified correctly as dread. She found out later what happened in that meeting. She found out in pieces from Britta, who liked her in the quiet, practical way that competent women sometimes immediately like each other, and from one of the junior escorts who talked too much and had been outside the tent. Gareth had been prepared. He had presented his version of events first, that Marin was a troubled woman, not fully wolf-born, who had removed herself from pack life voluntarily after several difficult years, who had developed an unhealthy attachment to some stray pups, and whose mental and emotional stability was honestly in question. He had been smooth about it. He had said Hollowborn several times in a way that was technically neutral and functionally damning, and he had suggested that the compassionate thing, really, would be to relocate the pups to proper pack care and ensure Marin received whatever support she needed. Cale had listened to all of it. Then he had asked Gareth to produce the documentation of Marin's voluntary withdrawal from pack census. Gareth had not been able to produce it because there was no such documentation. He had explained that the paperwork had been administrative in nature and was perhaps misfiled. Cale had asked for the birth records of the 6 pups and their current guardianship status within Ashfield Pack. Gareth had produced 3 of the 6 birth records and had no explanation for the other 3. Guardianship was listed as pack word for the 3 documented pups, which meant pack assets, which meant Gareth had the right to place them, to transfer them, to determine their futures. Cale had then said, very quietly, that he would be reviewing all census and guardianship records for Ashfield territory as part of his scheduled inspection, and that he expected full documentation to be available within 48 hours, and that any discrepancy between the documented record and the lived reality of pack members' situations would require formal explanation. He had also said, still quietly, that he was invoking the territorial king's right of temporary custody for the 6 pups, pending review, which meant they were now under Crown authority and could not be moved without his direct order. This had apparently been the point at which Gareth had understood that something had shifted beyond his ability to manage. Marin heard all of this the next morning, assembled from fragments, and sat with it for an hour in the quiet of the camp before she allowed herself to feel anything about it. What she felt, when she finally let herself, was not relief. Relief implied a fear had ended. What she felt was closer to the vertiginous sensation of standing on ground that had been assumed to be level and discovering it had been tilted the whole time, and that someone had reached over and set it straight. She was still feeling this when he appeared at the edge of the camp where she was sitting, and this time she did not have herself managed the way she liked to be, and the feeling must have shown on her face, because he stopped a few feet away and looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the one where he was taking in more than she had intended to display. "You heard," he said. "Most of it. I should have told you directly. I'm sorry." She blinked. An Alpha King apologizing to an unsense-used hollow-born for insufficient communication was not something she had a category for. "You don't have to—" "I should have told you before meeting with him," he said. "You deserve to know what I was going to do. Not because you needed my permission, but because it directly affects your children, and you should have been consulted." Your children. He had said your children without qualification, without the hedge of it being what they have or the pups you've taken in. Just yours. She looked down at her hands. The cut on her arm, beneath the clean bandage his medical person had applied, ached in a way that was bearable and specific. She focused on it for a moment. "Thank you," she said, "for the temporary custody. It keeps them safe." "For now," he said. "I intend to do more than that." She looked up. "I'm going to recommend dissolution of Gareth's Alpha authority over Ashfield," he said. "I have sufficient grounds from the census review alone, and there are other irregularities that his records make plain. This will take 60 days, possibly 90. During that time, Ashfield territory will be under a provisional Pack Council administrator." He paused. "I would like you to be involved in that process." "In what capacity?" "Advisorial, initially. You know this territory and its people. The administrator won't." He paused again. "And at the end of it, when the provisional period concludes and a new structure is established, I would like to offer you full Pack standing. Under Crown authority, not Pack authority, if that's what it takes, with your children formally registered under your custody." The dangerous warmth from yesterday had not gone away. It had been building, quietly, in the space between then and now, and she felt it acutely. She made herself be careful. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "Because what was done to you was wrong, and it's within my power to correct it." "That's the political reason," she said. "Why the rest of it?" A silence. This was a new kind of his silence, not evaluative, not settling, but more like a breath held. She watched something move through his expression, something that cost him, something that he was managing the same way she had managed her breathing in the den. "Because I find I cannot think about you in a category," he said finally, "and I have not been able to since I smelled you on the ridge." She did not breathe. "I'm not telling you this to pressure you," he said, quickly, carefully. "I want the record to be clear on that. The standing and the custody are not conditional on anything. I'm telling you because you asked, and because I have found that dishonesty about what I want costs more than the discomfort of saying it plainly." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the night in the den, the 4 hours, the counting of other people's breaths. She thought about 17 years of standing in moonlit clearings. She thought about the knot she had carried in her sternum since approximately age 7, the one that said, "You are not enough, you are not the right shape, you do not have what it takes to be wanted." She thought about the way he had sat in the ash at the ridge and said, "I'll wait." "I don't have a wolf," she said. "I know. You're the Alpha King. Your mate, when you take one, your people will expect." "My people's expectations are not what's happening in this conversation." He was still very still. "I am not asking you for anything. I am telling you what is true for me, so that you can make informed decisions about what is true for you." She let out a breath. "I don't know what's true for me yet," she said, "except that I'm very tired and my arm hurts and I have 6 children who need breakfast." Something changed on his face then, the smallest, most carefully contained thing, a shift at the corner of his mouth that was the compressed ancestor of a smile. "Then let's start there," he said. The 60 days were not 60 days. They stretched and complicated themselves the way all official processes do when they encounter men who do not want to yield their power. Gareth's response to the census review was to produce a flood of documentation, Some of it legitimate, some of it, Britta noted in the dry tones of someone who had seen this before, recently manufactured. He appealed to the Pack Council on procedural grounds, claiming that the territorial inspection had exceeded its scope and that the king had acted with personal bias, a pointed claim, not quite an accusation, filed carefully enough to require a formal response without being specific enough to constitute a direct charge. The appeal bought him 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, Marin was technically still in the gray zone, not expelled, not reinstated, existing under the Crown's temporary umbrella, along with the pups and watched by Gareth's people from a distance that was close enough to be noticed and far enough to maintain deniability. She was housed in the camp's secondary installation, a more permanent semi-structure on the edge of the Ashfield Ridge that served as the king's territorial base during extended inspections. The pups adapted to this with the speed that children have for adapting to safety within a week. They were exploring the camp's perimeter with the confidence of children who expect the world to hold, which broke Marin's heart and repaired it simultaneously, because she understood what that confidence cost them and what it meant that they had it now. She worked. This was not a sign she simply could not work. She organized the camp's supply inventory within the first week because it needed organizing. She helped the camp's medical person with a difficult night when 2 of the camp's security staff came back from a ridge patrol with smoke inhalation. She started making meals for the pups and ended up making meals for whoever was nearby, because she had cooked for 7 on a budget that required exactness, and she found she could scale up without thinking about it. And people ate the food and said things to her that felt too simple to be compliments and were probably just gratitude, but she stored them carefully because she was not accustomed to them. He was there. He was often at the far edge of her awareness, not hovering, not managing her, but present in the ways that a large and responsible person is present in a space they are responsible for. She saw him in morning briefings that she was sometimes included in. She saw him in the evenings when the camp settled and he would sometimes be outside, standing at the edge of the ridge, looking at the territory spread below him, the way she had learned to look at the den, not as something owned, but as something held in trust. Once she came to stand beside him without planning to, and they had stood there for 20 minutes not speaking, and it had not been uncomfortable, and that had startled her more than anything else so far. She was falling. She knew she was falling the way you know a floor has given out while you are still in the process of falling in the present tense, with the knowledge complete and the impact not yet arrived. She was falling and she was afraid of it, not because she did not want to, but because she was a hollow-born woman with 6 orphaned children and a 4-year gap in her pack record. And he was a king, and the world had a long history of telling her that what she reached for was not available in her size. The attack came on the 43rd day, at the point when Gareth's position had deteriorated enough that the Pack Council appeal was expected to fail, which was apparently the point at which Gareth decided that subtlety was a tool he no longer needed. It was not a physical attack on Marin herself. It was smarter than that and more damaging. A formal letter to the Pack Council's investigative body, copied to 3 regional pack leaders who were Gareth's allies, laying out a detailed claim that Marin was not merely a hollow-born, but was an unstable individual who had taken the pups through manipulation and possibly coercion, who was currently leveraging her proximity to the Alpha King for personal gain, and whose influence over a sitting territorial sovereign constituted a potential security concern. The letter used the word bewitched. It was not precise enough to be a formal supernatural accusation, which would have required evidence and a healer's certification, but it was imprecise in a way that planted the image. The letter went public within 24 hours of its submission. Pack Council proceedings were technically confidential, but in practice were permeable, and Gareth had allies with both access and motivation. Marin found out the way she found out most things that concerned her, after the fact, from a secondary source. When Britta came to her camp workspace with a look that combined professional composure and personal fury in a ratio that Britta alone could have managed, she read the letter. She read it twice. Then she set it down on the table and sat very quietly for a while and did the things she did. When she was managing something too large for her hands, she cataloged the damage precisely, item by item, because that was how she had always turned overwhelming things into manageable ones. Her reputation, with people who didn't know her, damaged. The pup situation, under Crown custody, temporarily stable but now under heightened scrutiny. Her position in the camp, her access to the process, potentially compromised. His position, in relation to her, complicated in ways that were unfair to him and that she had, in however small a way, contributed to by staying. This last item was the one that made her decision. She was going to leave the camp. She was going to take the pups she still had, the king's written temporary custody authorization, which would hold regardless of where she was physically, and she was going to go somewhere outside of Gareth's territory, outside of the range of his ability to escalate, and she was going to wait out the proceeding from a distance where her presence was not a liability to the person who had sat in the ash and waited for her. She began packing that evening, quietly, efficiently, packing the way she had packed everything she had moved in the past 4 years, with selection, with reduction to essentials, with the discipline of someone who has learned that what you carry needs to be worth its weight. She was 3/4 through when she heard the tent entrance move. She did not look up immediately because she knew the particular weight of the step, and she needed one more second with her own composure before she faced him. "Britta told you," she said. "I'd already read it," he said. "Then you know why I'm—" She gestured at the packing. "I know what you think you're doing," he said. "I disagree with the reasoning." Kale. She had started using his name somewhere in the second week and had not been corrected. The letter exists. It will be followed by more letters. Every day I'm here, I give Gareth another piece of ammunition. Gareth's ammunition expires in 11 days. He came fully into the tent. He was not performing calm. He was calm. But underneath the calm she had learned to read the thing he kept banked low, the warmth, the careful fire of it. The appeal has failed. The Pack Council issued its ruling 2 hours ago. I have full authority to proceed with his removal. She stopped moving. 11 days, he said, is not enough time to justify what you're about to do. She looked at the half-packed bag in her hands. She put it down. She sat on the edge of the nearest cot, which happened to be small because it was a pup's cot, and she looked ridiculous sitting on it, and she didn't care. "The letter says I bewitched you," she said. "That word. I know what word it used. If there's even the appearance, there is not a person on this territory or within the Pack Council's body who believes I am capable of being bewitched," he said, with a dryness so precise it was almost physical. Despite everything, she felt the ghost of a laugh move through her. "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" "The point is that you have 11 years of reputation and 47 packs and 300 years of bloodline, and I have 6 pups and a cut on my arm and no wolf, and the math of what happens when I stay is different for you than it is for me." She met his eyes. "I don't want to cost you anything. That's the point." He looked at her for a long time. She had said too much. She knew she had said too much, had shown too much of what was underneath the practical language, had let the shape of what she felt become visible in the geometry of what she was refusing to do. She watched him decide something. He crossed the tent to where she sat on the small pup's cot, and he crouched down in front of her, the same posture as the ridge, the same ashen ground level meeting, as if he had decided some time ago that this was the right way to speak to her, without height, without the architecture of authority between them, and he said, "How could I not love every part of what I've seen you do? You sat in a burning den for 4 hours, and the only thing you counted was their breath. You built something out of nothing for 4 years because someone decided you were less than you were. You looked at me on that ridge the first morning and told me you were fine when you were bleeding, because you were not the thing that needed attending to." His voice was low and even, and the words were doing something to the air in the tent, to the pressure of it. "You have no wolf, and you are more wolf than anyone I have governed, because you know what it means to protect your own, and you know what it costs, and you paid it without asking for acknowledgement." He paused. "How could I not love that? How could I have not loved it from the first breath?" The knot in her sternum, the one she had carried since age 7, the one that said, "Not enough, wrong shape, unavailable to you," moved. She felt it move. She felt it begin, incrementally and irrevocably, to loosen. "You're the Alpha King," she said, and her voice was not entirely steady. "Yes." "And you're crouching on the floor of a pup's tent." "Yes." "This is not how I imagined this kind of conversation happening." "How did you imagine it?" She looked at him. I didn't, she said honestly. I didn't imagine it. I had decided it wasn't something I was allowed to imagine. He reached out and put his hand over hers on the edge of the cot, and she felt the warmth of it go through her like something that had been waiting for permission. I am asking you to stay, he said, not as a political necessity, not because the process requires your presence, because I would like you here. Because 11 days from now, when this is resolved, I intend to make a proposal that I would prefer you to be physically present to hear. She looked at their hands. All right, she said. I'll stay. On the 54th day, in the presence of the full Pack Council delegation, the assembled pack leaders of the Eastern Mountain Territories, and 300 gathered pack members of Ashfield who had been called to witness the formal change of territorial authority, Cale removed Gareth as Alpha of Ashfield and installed a provisional administrator in the Pack Council's name. Gareth accepted this with the dignity of a man who had no remaining options and a crowd of people who were watching him be measured. He signed the documentation. He said the required words. He did not look at Marin, who was standing at the edge of the assembly with Wren on her hip and the other 5 pups arranged around her like a constellation. But everyone who was looking at Gareth could see that he was making a considerable effort not to look at her, which was itself a kind of looking. After the formal proceedings, Cale addressed the gathered pack. He spoke about administrative reform. He spoke about census accuracy and the pack's obligations to all its members, regardless of their form or their capacity. He spoke about the specific provisions that would govern Ashfield's transition period. He was precise and thorough and not given to oratorical excess, and the crowd listened with the attention of people who were being told things that mattered. And then he said, "There is one further matter." The crowd stilled. He did not look at his papers. He looked across the assembly to where Marin was standing with Wren on her hip, and Marin went very still because she recognized the look, the assessment look that was not really assessment at all. That was the specific face he made when he had already decided something and was now just locating it in the world. "Marin of Ashfield," he said, across the 300 people and the distance between them, and his voice carried without effort, has lived on this territory for 24 years. She has, without pack support, without recognition, without the shift, built a home and raised 6 children and kept them alive through a mountain fire with nothing but her own body and her own knowledge and her own courage. He paused. She was removed from this pack's census through administrative misconduct. I am today restoring her name to the record. The crowd was very quiet. I am also, he said, and now there was something different in his voice, something that was under the formal register and made the formal register sound like a container that was slightly too small for what it was holding. Formally recognizing her as my intended mate before this assembly and the Pack Council's delegation, under the authority of my name and my house and everything my house is responsible for. She is to be accorded all rights, all standing, all protections that this designation carries, unconditionally, without reservation, without any requirement that she be something other than exactly what she is. There was a sound in the crowd, a collective exhale, a murmur that moved through 300 people like weather. Marin stood with Wren on her hip, and the ash memory of a den on the eastern ridge somewhere in her bones, and she felt the knot in her sternum come fully, finally, loose. She had been a hollow-born. She had stood in moonlit clearings for 10 years and been found empty, been found insufficient, been told by the shape of her own skin that she was not what was wanted. She had built her life in the margins because the center had closed its doors. And she looked at him across 300 people and the whole complicated geography of what she was, and she thought, "You didn't love me, despite the hollow. You found me in the dark because of what I was doing inside it." She thought, "I have been the right shape all along. I was just in the wrong places to see it." Wren said something against her ear, a small word, a pup's word, probably food-related, and Marin tightened her arm around the small, warm body and looked at Cale and did something she almost never did in public, which was let her face say exactly what she meant. He saw it. She knew he saw it because the careful composure, the 11 years of it, the 300-year bloodline inheritance of it broke at the corner of his mouth in the same tiny, compressed, privately enormous way it had when she had told him about the pup's breakfast, and this time he let it happen, This time he didn't manage it back. And the people nearest to him saw it too, and the murmur in the crowd changed quality. She walked toward him. She walked with Ren on her hip and 5 children reforming around her as she moved, because children are nothing if not responsive to their person moving with purpose, and she walked across the assembly ground until she was in front of him, close enough that the warmth of him was something she could feel on her face. "You could have told me it was going to be in front of everyone," she said, low enough that the front rows might have heard and no one else. "You might have argued," he said, equally low. "I definitely would have argued." "I know." The compressed non-smile again, fully present now. Was I wrong to do it this way? She thought about it honestly. She thought about the 7-year-old in the clearing and the hollow verdict and the 4 years at the edge of the territory where the world stopped acknowledging you, and the 4 hours in the burning den where she had counted other people's breaths because hers were the ones that could be discounted. She thought about how long the knot had lived in her sternum and how it felt to have it gone, and whether she would have let it go quietly, in a tent, in private, or whether she had needed exactly this, the public claiming, the defiant declaration, the non-negotiable announcement made before witnesses that she existed and was chosen and it was not up for discussion. "No," she said, "you weren't wrong." He put his hand on the side of her face, careful, deliberate, a touch that asked and answered in the same motion, and she turned into it the way she had trained herself not to turn into things. The way she had stopped turning toward warmth because warmth had always been conditional before, and she felt the mate bond do what it had been trying to do since the ridge, felt it settle between them, like something that had been waiting for the right moment and had decided this was it, this assembly ground, this morning. This man with ash on his boots and gray eyes, and a composure that had just, publicly and permanently, let her in. The crowd around them was doing something with its collective voice that was not quite silence and not quite sound. The 6 pups, led by Ren, had distributed themselves with the unself-conscious efficiency of small children who perceive a large person as a stable structure. The smallest 3 had attached to Kale's legs, and Marin watched his expression process this with something that was not quite surprise and not quite wonder, but lived in the neighborhood of both. He looked down at the small hands on his trousers and then back up at her. "Are they always like this?" he said. "They're like this with people they trust," she said. He looked at the pups for a long moment, with the gray assessment eyes, and this time, when the careful, tender things surfaced in his face, he did not manage it back at all. "Then I'll learn to deserve it," he said. The provisional period ended in 93 days, not 60, because bureaucratic processes are constitutionally resistant to efficiency. By the time the new Ashfield administration was formalized and the Pack Council's review concluded and the paperwork for Marin's full reinstatement was signed and stamped and filed in triplicate, the season had turned and the ridge was gold with autumn, and the den had been repaired properly this time, with Kale's people helping, reinforced with timber and fitted with a real smoke baffle and a cleared fire break that extended 20 meters in every direction. She had insisted on repairing the den. He had not argued, though she knew he would have preferred to simply provide different, better, permanent accommodation, because he was a man who wanted to solve things, and she was a woman who wanted to understand them. The den was not where she would live indefinitely. It was the thing she had built with her hands and her knowledge and her years, and it deserved to be made right, and she had needed to be the one to make it right. He understood this. He did not always understand it immediately, but he came to it, and she had learned that this was how he loved things, seriously, with effort, arriving at understanding rather than assuming it. He asked questions she had not expected him to ask. He listened to her answers with the same quality of attention he brought to his administrative briefings, which was the most intimate thing she had ever experienced from another person, and which continued to catch her off guard in ways she had given up being embarrassed about. They were mated in a ceremony small enough to be real, and witnessed only by the Pack Council representative and Britta and the 6 pups, who were formally and legally adopted the same morning in the same ceremony, making it a document both a wedding and a founding simultaneously. Ren slept through most of it with her head on the table. The others paid close attention, and later claimed they had understood everything, which was almost certainly untrue and was perfect. She stood in the morning light of that day and felt herself counted. Not counted in the census, not counted in the pack record, though those things had been corrected and were real and mattered. Counted in the specific human and wolf-born and hollow-born sense of mattering to someone, of being the person whose breath someone was counting while the fire passed. She thought about the moonlit clearings, the 17 years of nothing moving. She thought, the wolf was never the point. The wolf was the question. I was always the answer. She pressed her hand flat against Cale's chest, just over his heartbeat, and felt his hand come to rest on hers, warm and calloused and patient, the hand of a man who had sat in the ash of a burning ridge and waited because she was worth waiting for. And she thought, this is what it is to be found, not because you were lost, but because someone was looking. The 6 pups were outside in the morning light, loud and ordinary and entirely safe, and the ridge beyond them was gold with season, and the den on the eastern face stood repaired and ready for whatever fire might come next. And Marin of Ashfield stood in the center of the life she had built from discarded pieces and let it be, finally and completely, enough.